Hey, I feel like I'm on a roll, so I'm going to do one more video. Section 2, the origins of the agency and seats of secret operations. By the end of World War II, it was abundantly clear that the U.S. must have a central intelligence authority. The mistakes which were made more by omission than by commission by the intelligence community during the war were serious. This country could never again afford the luxury of overlooking the need for reliable intelligence. The witch hunt, spelling error that took place right after the war is an attempt to fix. We'll fix it. The blame for the disaster at Pearl Harbor was indicative of the depth of the problem. It bothers him. So it's page 77. It says HSUNT. After the war, it became clear to many that we had seriously overestimated the strength of the Japanese, and that we had, as a result, seriously overrated the task that confronted the Russians in moving their eastern armies across Manchuria against the Japanese at the end of the war. In addition to these rather obvious criticisms, there was the fact of the atomic bomb. It had been developed in great secrecy under the Manhattan Project, but once it had been demonstrated at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was no longer a secret. Scientists all over the world would be attempting to solve the bomb's problems, knowing now that it was entirely feasible and practical, and their own intelligence and spy networks would be trying to steal the secrets of the bomb from the United States. This put another serious burden upon the intelligence community. Not long after the cessation of hostilities, the first measures toward the establishment of the Central Intelligence Authority were announced. Less than 6 months after the end of the war, the president set up the Central Intelligence Group. The New York Times on January 23, 1946, reported that President Truman established a National Intelligence Authority composed of the Secretaries of State, War, and Navy. It was to be headed by a Director of Central Intelligence. The DCI would have at his disposal the staff and organizations of all government intelligence units, including those overseas, and would undertake such services of common concern as the National Intelligence Authority determines can be more efficiently accomplished centrally. This provision would enable the director to operate his own staff for top secret and high priority missions, while utilizing the production of all other agency staff operations for intelligence production. The plan was divided by the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a modification of one submitted by General William Donovan at the time of the dissolution of the OSS. It deviated from Donovan's suggestion in several important particulars, however. First, it placed the Central Intelligence Group and its director under the jurisdiction of the Secretarial Triumvirate. In the accepted plan, this triumvirate retained authority over the Central Intelligence Group instead of placing the group directly under the president. Second, it provided that operating funds for the organization would be obtained by the Departments of State, War, and Navy rather than directly from Congress, as had been provided by Donovan's plan, and Star Wars comes up. As a consequence, the group was responsible not to Congress but to the cabinet members making up the top authority. In its directive, the president ordered that all federal and foreign intelligence activities be planned, developed, and coordinated so as to assure the most effective accomplishment of the intelligence mission related to national security. And then what's coming up for me right now is abuse of aliens. And if I find out that there was abuse to nice, kind aliens, you better believe that I'm going to go insane. Thus, less than 6 months after the end of World War II, the battle lines for a major internal war had been drawn. Most of the problems and the failures of the past 25 years can be attributed directly to inadequate and improper decisions made during these struggles within the government during this immediate post-war period, and to the impact they had upon the welfare of this country since that time. And Obama's responsible. On one side were the tradition experienced planners who believed in the power of this great nation, all who felt that our future course lay in the increase of our own strength and of the beneficent impact of this strength upon the rest of the world. These men believed in the American way of life and in the ability of our economy to cope with world competition and of American diplomacy to plan our course of action wisely and to carry out effective national policy. And now I'm being distracted, and they're trying to tell me that aliens are not real. And we all know that's not true. They further believed in the capabilities of American military might to back up our diplomats and businessmen. To put it bluntly, these men were not afraid of the communist bogeyman. They respected communism for what it was, and they respected the power and strength of the Russian people. At the same time, they were willing and ready to plan for common world future and undivided world at peace. The other side, however, wished to create a sort of Maginot line of intelligence people around the world, separating the communist world from the free world. Then they would peer out of the rest of the world through a veil of secrecy plugged into data inputs of the intelligence gathering sources, wherever they were, and supported by a military machine and a defense posture ready for reaction at all times. In essence, this latter point of view of foreign policy operations is passive and reactive, implemented not by plan but only by response to the initiatives of others. He said they were extremely evil, and they were laughing at him as he was attempting to protect himself. And that's your U.S. government, CIA agency. This is a well stated by Alan Dulles in this book, The Craft of Intelligence. The military threat in the nuclear missile age is well understood, and we are rightly spending billions to counter it. We must similarly deal with all aspects of this invisible war. Khrushchev's wars of liberation, the subversive threats orchestrated by the Soviet Communist Party with all its ramifications and fronts supported by espionage, letting you know that part of the reason why they are abusive to us is because of some of the abuse that your CIA agencies have done to their communities. Because they're way smarter than you and way more talented and a lot more awesome than you are. The last thing we can afford to do today is to put our intelligence in chains. Its protective and information role is indispensable in an era of unique and continuing danger. The key word counter appears in the first sentence. This final and summary paragraph of the Old Master's book is the best sample of the intelligence team's view on how to live in the modern nuclear age. They would have us establish the most extensive and expensive intelligence network possible and then develop a feedback capability that would automatically counter every threat they saw. Although Alan Dulles does not say it in his book, I can't wait to read your book, I told him. His concept of intelligence is about 10% real intelligence and 90% clandestine operations, meaning Dulles' book is a fraud. In other words, he would have us busy all around the world all the time countering all aspects of the invisible war. By these, he means intervening in the internal affairs of other nations with or without their knowledge and permission. It's like his book is like a wild goose chase. This leads to a serious danger which will be treated at some length later. It is what the United States has been doing in an increasing crescendo of events, beginning with such actions as the involvement in Berlin and Iran in the 1940s and culminating in the terrible disaster of Vietnam that began as a major intelligence operation, went on into the clandestine operations stage then got out of hand and had to become an overt activity during the Johnson era. Traditionally, the foreign policy of the nation has been planned and, to the extent possible, has been openly arrived at. On those occasions when diplomacy has failed, the armed might of this country has been exploited overtly to back up foreign policy, or in the last resort to accomplish what diplomacy has been able to do by going to war. In the view of foreign policy action and the role of intelligence as stated by Dulles, however, intelligence would be the device used to set foreign policy actions in motion to counter all aspects of the invisible war. If this is not clear, he emphasizes the military threat in the nuclear missile age is well understood, and we are rightly spending billions to counter it. The idea is that intelligence is the catalytic element that triggers response, and this response will be covert, operational, and military is required. With the advert of a strong intelligence community and with the ascendancy of that voice in the higher echelons of the government, the government has slowly but positively moved from an active course of following plans and policies to the easier and more expedient course of the counter-puncture. The government has become increasingly adept at reaction and response. I think I'm being kidnapped. A simple review of what the government really found itself doing in the Congo or in Laos or Tibet during the 60s would be enough to clarify and support the argument that the government responded to action inputs and did something instead of turning to points and national objectives which it did not have. Further support of these theses that the government has been weaned away from plans and policies in favor of the easier response mechanism. They're like walking and looking at me really weird. It's like someone looking at you like this. That's what I feel like, but I also don't feel very good either. Activated by intelligence is apparent in its even, and I'm having trouble saying things, in even a cursory look at the degradation of the roles of the once prestigious Departments of State of Defense. Lately, the Army has found new worlds to conquer under the cloak of the Green Berets who operated with the CIA. Even the Air Force welcomes utilization of once proud P-52 strategic bomber in a function that is totally degrading the blind bombardment of Indochina's forests and wastelands on the assumption that there are worthwhile targets on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The only reason state and defense can give for what they have permitted themselves to become engaged in is that the intelligence report says the enemy is there. No one asks, what is the national objective in Indochina? No one has a national plan for Indochina. We have become counterpunchers without a game plan, and we have become that because we take our cues from raw intelligence data. I think I'm being channeled. In our form of government, this is a fairly recent approach. In 1929, when Secretary of State Simpson said, "Gentlemen, do not read other people's mail," he was voicing the conditions of another era. We have come a long way since the days of 1929, and nations do read each other's mails because it is easier to do now than it used to be, and because the dangers that exist today are much closer to home. We need to know as much as it is possible to learn about Russian capabilities and the Russian intent. Total destruction is only about 45 minutes away, but there was another reason. Simpson made that statement. In an open society, we do not develop the same willies that are necessary in a world in which everyone reads everyone's mail. Therefore, you are going to defend yourself by reading the other man's mail. You had better know that what he means by what he has written in his letters. He knows you are reading his mail, and he will bluff you right out of the game. And what is more important, we must carry out our own policies in such a way that he cannot keep us from our goals. It is this point that looms larger when the government such as ours carries out its foreign and military affairs on a response basis. Such action over a period of time denies us all initiative and leadership and virtually precludes the possibility of bluff or skillful design. One cannot very well bluff or use surprise when he has been set in a pattern of response for 25 years. In military terms, the employment of proper tactics and strategy must be tempered by surprise when needed. In the great contrast that has been going on between the major powers today, one can see that our course in response to such things as communist-inspired subversive insurgency has cost us hundreds of billions of dollars and tens of thousands of lives. It has cost the same communists we proclaim we are countering almost nothing. The response method of anything is a trap. The most frustrating and debilitating thing about it is that we have no objectives and no goals. We simply have an inertial drift into whatever direction the men in the Kremlin lure us. It's important to realize that if the highest echelons in the government become preoccupied and preempted by intelligence input, voluminous reports, and other briefings, they do not have a chance to get planning done, to weigh alternatives, and to see the policies are effective. General Donovan and Allen Dulles made a career of trying to have the Director of Central Intelligence assigned to the immediate office of the President for just the reason outlined above. They wanted to be placed in the dominant position in this government. They knew that with modern techniques, with modern communications and effective controls, all supported by money and equipment, wherever needed, intelligence was capable of running the government and its foreign affairs. The Kissinger example is a case in point. This was the danger that the legislators saw in Donovan's early proposal. It is why the president, acting on his own authority, placed the director under the jurisdiction of the three secretaries. To emphasize his intent and to make sure that it would work his way, President Truman directed that operating funds for the organization would be obtained from the Departments of State, War, and Navy instead of directly from Congress. The Donovan plan had proposed the opposite. If the DCI was required to get his money each year through these other departments, it would be subservient to them, and he would carry out their wishes. These were the surface reasons for the decision. The real reason for this relegation of the DCI to a subordinate position was to prevent the director and his organization from participating in clandestine operations without the express direction and authority of the secretaries in the White House. And as we have noted, President Truman planned for the CIA to be the quiet intelligence arm of the president. He and those of his administration never contended it become an autonomous operational agency in the clandestine field. Because of the general secrecy that surrounds such things, this debate did not become public. The establishment of a national intelligence authority by Truman was considered an interim arrangement. And day after he set up the group, the president announced the appointment of Rear Admiral Cindy Sewers as the first director of Central Intelligence. At that same time, the president established a precedent that he has continued to this day by designating Admiral William D. to represent him as the member of the National Intelligence Authority. Before his appointment to his new job, Admiral Sewers had been the deputy chief of the Office of Naval Intelligence. It was learned concurrently that President Truman had ordered that all federal and foreign intelligence activities be planned, developed, and coordinated so as to assure that most effective accomplishments of the intelligence mission related to the national security. The president's directive contained further instructions to the Director of Intelligence. They were: accomplish the correlation and evaluation of intelligence related to national security and provide for appropriate dissemination within the government of the resulting strategic and national intelligence. 2. Plan for the coordination of such the activities of the intelligence agency of all departments as they relate to the national security and recommended to the National Intelligence Authority and establishes such overall policies and objectives as well assure the most effective accomplishment of the national intelligence mission. A few weeks later, the New York Times published an article by Hanson Baldwin, its military affairs columnist, saying that the establishment of the National Intelligence Authority is a very important move. It is more important than the proposed merger of the War and Navy departments. In all parts of the world today, intelligence is most emphatically and first line of defense. This is an interest in using of the term first line of defense. It appears many times later in the writings and speeches of such men as Allen Dulles and General Donovan. To them, intelligence was not limited to information. It was very much an operational organization and function. Baldwin went on to say that the new intelligence authority under Admiral Seward will at most just call it and analyze intelligence. Later on, it may take over the job of collection of intelligence, and later its agents will supplement the normal intelligence sources of the military services. He added the State Department's new intelligence service under Colonel Alfred McCormick will continue, but will probably be somewhat more restricted to scope than it has been. Both of these statements were prophetic and indicate that Baldwin had obtained this information from Donovan Dulles sources. It was the party lines that intelligence would take over the task of collection, whether Congress and the administration had the function in the law or not. In the heat of this major behind-the-scenes power play, there was bound to be an explosion. It is quite possible that this development, which occurred during the first week of 1946, did not carry with it at the time the same significance that it does in retrospect. On the first day of March 1946, General Donovan came in impassioned and hard-hitting speech before the Overseas Press Club in New York City. He stated that there had been numerous times when faulty and inaccurate intelligence had done great damage to this country's prosecution of the war, but that the main burden of the speech concerned the new intelligence authority. He said that experience had shown that we could obtain tested knowledge only through a coordinated, centralized, civilian-directed intelligence service, independent of other departments of the government. Service. Here he was taking a direct slap at General MacArthur and the JCS as well as its administration. He agreed that the new Central Intelligence Group established by the President was an advance over anything we had previously had in peacetime, but it lacked civilians' control and independence. Donovan voiced displeasure over any intelligence setup that did not dominate the scene. While Admiral Seward was setting up his new organizations, Congress was working on the National Defense Act. The public was interested and aroused over the provisions of the act as it pertained to a new Department of Defense. The big word at the time was unification. Feeling we had run strong during World War II, that the military services should have been more unified, it claimed that they would have been more efficient and there might have been less confusion and waste. At the same time, there was a number of advocates of an independent Air Force. Up to that time, the Air Force had always been a part of the Army. What was called unification at that time seems more like separation today, because the new law, when it was enacted, established a separate Army and Navy and a new Air Force. As we know them today, they are still far from unified. In the heat of all this discussion, there was little public airing of the provision of the Central Intelligence Agency. Those were troubled and confused times. The war was less than 1 year past, and people who looked back at it forgot all of the worldwide campaigns and remembered only the shock and terror of the automatic explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with fear of the unknown always more deadly than fear of a conventional shooting war. There was no chance to relax from the tensions of the world struggle, safe in the knowledge that another world war could not start up at any time, as we had believed after World War I. On the contrary, the threat of atomic warfare, even though it might be sometime in the future, was so terrifying that many felt the potential danger of nuclear weapons in the hands of the Soviet Union represented a graver peril than all the battles in the World War II. I don't mean to smile at that, but my friendly aliens just came and they made funny faces at me. As a result, with the war only 6 months behind him, Congress and the administration turned to the serious problems of defense. Thus, to the same day that General Donovan had spoken to the Overseas Press Club, Secretary of State James Byrnes also addressed that group. It was the most revealing to look back at the major differences between the two speeches. Addressing this group as the official spokesman of the administration, he said that there was one thing that was very important. The question is, what can we do to make certain that there will never be another war? Then, citing problems of the war, he went on, Our relief and our gratitude for victory are mixed with uncertainty. Our goal is now permanent peace, and certainly we seek it even more anxiously than we sought victory. The difficulty is that the path to permanent peace is not so easy to see and to follow as was the path to victory. He said that because we know that no nation can make peace by itself, we have pinned our hopes to the banner of the U.S., Byrnes added. If we are going to do our part to maintain peace in the world, we must maintain our power to do so. We must make it clear that we will stand united with the other great states in defense of the Charter of the UN. If we are to be a great power, we must act as a great power, not only in order to ensure our own scrutiny, but in order to preserve the peace of the world. Continuing, he said, it is not in accord with our traditions to maintain a large professional standing army, but we must be able and ready to provide an armed contingent that may be required on short notice. We must have a trained citizenry ready to supplement those of the armed contingents. After making these statements, Byrnes added a very interesting comment that has special significance and applicability today. He said, our tradition has peace-loving, law-abiding, democratic people should be an assurance that our forces will not be used except as they may be called into action by the Security Council and cannot be employed in war without the consent of Congress. We need not fear their misuse unless we distress the representatives of the people. In view of what has transpired in the Vietnam War, Byrnes' last statement takes on special meaning. As he continued his speech, he made another most interesting remark. So far as the United States is concerned, we will gang up against no state. We will do nothing to break the world into exclusive blocks or spheres of influence in this atomic age. We will not seek to divide a world which is one and indivisible. This one world view, this idea that no nation should do that which would destroy hopes for world unity and harmony, was the official policy of the administration at that time. It was a national policy of a people dedicated to the proposition that this country was strong and able enough to stand upon its own feet and make its own way in the world. It was a positive and active policy that would plan for the future, yet only 5 days later, another speech of another kind did more to turn the minds of the world, and especially of the United States, and to blight our future than any other speech in the following quarter century. It is startling and most significant to recall that the then leaders of the loyal opposition in the British House of Commons, Sir Winston Churchill, only 5 days after Secretary Byrnes' speech, made a speech that was just the opposite. He declared, beware, the time may be short, from Stettin to the Baltic to Trieste to the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. In this famous Iron Curtain speech, Churchill, like many others, was driving the tip of the wedge between the great powers of the world, while at most the same time the Secretary of State had said, we will do nothing to break the world into exclusive blocks or spheres or influence the atomic age. We will not seek to divide the world, which is one and indivisible. Here again was a classic contest. The active covert planner, Byrnes, versus the passive covert reactivist, Churchill. I'm going to stop it at that because my battery is about to die.